Hello and welcome to Assemblies of the World with me, Anna Isabel. And today I am joined by Michael Blowman. Hello, Michael.
Hello, how are you, Anna?
Very well. And I I think it might be good for the audience to get a sense of your background in science before we get started.
Okay, that's wonderful. I'm steeped, if you like, ankle deep in physics and chemistry that I've always loved since I was at the grammar school, and I graduated as a chemical engineer. And yeah, people when they have questions about physics and stuff, that it's usually me they ask. And I'm very happy with that. It makes me feel really quite proud to have to contribute. That's why I got involved in what we're going to be discussing, really.
And that's exactly why you're here, because you are the man to answer the questions that have been on my mind. And so maybe it might be a good place to start now that we know who you are with carbon. What is carbon?
Okay, well, I suppose you'd call carbon one of the elements that is actually the building block of life on this planet, because every single living thing contains carbon. And by living thing, I also mean not just us and animals and organisms, but also plants and trees. We all have carbon. In fact, we humans are around 18% of our makeup is carbon. So you cannot deny that carbon is an extremely important part of the whole natural cycle. And cycle is the word. And I'll explain that maybe later.
Okay, good. So carbon obviously makes us think about carbon dioxide. And the question on my mind is carbon dioxide the great evil that it's made out to be?
How can you call something that allows us, once the process takes place, to actually live and breathe? Because carbon dioxide, formed of the two elements, carbon and oxygen, is essential because through the photosynthesis process, meaning they need light, okay, and they synthesize, plants and trees actually provide us with oxygen. Without plants and trees, we wouldn't be here. Because where would the oxygen come from?
Absolutely. It seems to me that it's a very delicate interplay that exists between all life on this planet, not least of which plants and us. And I think that if we were truly concerned, we would be having lots of plants around us, instead of which they're busy chopping down trees. So it's a very important thing, isn't it, to have that?
We have a what you might call a symbiotic relationship with vegetation and plants. They need us and we need them. Now, the important part there is that if we want, and it's been proved in past history, many hundreds of years ago, if we want a thriving planet, then we need higher levels of carbon dioxide, because the more carbon dioxide we have, the more the plants grow, and thereby they flourish and they produce the food and the infrastructure for the animal world and everyone else. So, carbon dioxide isn't an evil, it's actually an essential part of this planet.
So aside from plants, which breathe out, well, actually they breathe in carbon dioxide, so they need the carbon dioxide. I guess the question I am wondering is, what else produces carbon dioxide
Well,
in the natural world?
in the natural world, there are two important things to remember. The biggest store of carbon dioxide on the planet is actually in the oceans. Okay? Now, the oceans, through plankton and what happens within the ocean, are a store of carbon dioxide because they only give off the carbon dioxide when they get warm. So they start off in the Arctic and those Greenland and everything else, and the ocean flow then moves all the way around through the bottom of Africa and ends up some 400 to 500 years later over in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. And that's where it releases the carbon dioxide. So when you're looking at levels of carbon dioxide on the planet, you have to remember that matter, the principle of physics, is the following. Matter can neither be created nor destroyed. It can evolve into a different form and back again, but you can't create something that didn't already exist. It's impossible, because that's the nature and the law of physics. There is only so much of this and so much of that. That's how the planet works. So if this carbon dioxide exists in the ocean, when it pops out at the other end and we have increases in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, nobody's created it. It was always there. It's the same as when the plants die or the trees die, okay? They've taken in the carbon dioxide, created carbon. That's their structure. The trunk, the trees, the leaves, whatever else, okay? And the vegetation. When they die, and what happens there, the carbon hasn't been lost. But what happens then, there are bacteria, microorganisms that then work on this dead vegetation. And guess what? They release carbon dioxide. So there's the cycle. Okay? You cannot get away from the fact that everything in the planet, this whole world, and where the world is situated within the universe, is all about cycles. There are so many cycles occurring all at the same time. You could not create a computer model that could predict which of those cycles was going to be more important than another. It's impossible. There isn't a powerful enough computer to do that.
Well, we know the disastrous consequences of computer modeling for the prediction of all sorts of things, from the spread of certain viruses to foot and mouth disease years back. I think that was 91, that one was. So computer modeling has its limits as to its reliability in terms of predicting the future. So coming back then to carbon dioxide, we can see how it exists in nature, how it's essential in order for life on the planet, because our plants thrive on it. So I guess my next question is, how is the carbon dioxide that's produced by us, what is the volume of it? How much are we producing versus what's already there in nature? And can it be as damaging as what we're being told?
Okay, well, let's put it into context. Yeah. The percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 0.04%. So it's very small. I like to give you this example, which I will in a second, which is a pictorial example of what I mean by this. Now, according to everyone that puts these figures out based on computer modeling. And remember, as a mathematician, I can produce you any sort of figures you like to prove anything, because that's what maths can do. So a computer model is only an interpretation of mathematics. You either go this way or you go that way. What are you trying to prove? Okay, so we're told that man contributes 4% of this 0.04%. So in other words, we contribute 0.016% of the atmosphere. Now, this is akin to if you took the whole of the Houses of Parliament, the bell tower, with the spire on the top, okay, the amount that we produce is about 3 inches of the spire. Does that put it into context?
Yes, I think it does.
So are we actually creating a problem? Actually, no, because carbon dioxide at the moment, and it will vary because it's like a sawtooth, okay, over hundreds and hundreds of years. The amount of carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere at the moment is actually critically low. In fact, if I was going to be controversial, we should be creating more carbon dioxide, because that gives us more growth, more vegetation. We would be better. We'd have more oxygen. I mean, the whole place would. And this is what happened in the Middle Ages. Otherwise, how did they grow grapes and make wine in Kent in the Middle Ages? There weren't any 4x4s. There weren't any aeroplanes. There weren't it. But the levels of carbon dioxide were high. Now, nobody has yet explained to me where, in the Middle Ages that happened, but suddenly 0.04% and 4% of that is suddenly a problem. Well, the science and the maths doesn't gel.
I guess, some skeptics there would say, yes, but, we do grow grapes now as well. However, that's ignoring the fact that what you're saying is that there have been times in our history where it's documented that the temperatures were warmer than they are now, in the same way that that it's documented that there are times in history where the temperatures were much cooler. So I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. But I guess the other question that I think is worth addressing is, what about sea levels? Are they really rising? And if so, what is actually causing that? Is it really the melting of the ice caps?
This is the one thing that I love when people ask me about this. And I say, okay, do you occasionally have cocktails? Yes. Okay. And the barman fills your glass full of ice, doesn't it? Before he puts everything in, it's absolutely jam-packed to the top. Okay. Does that mean that if you left it there, it would all overflow all over the floor because the ice would melt and increase the level of this liquid that was in the glass? No, because the only molecule that actually expands when it freezes is water. No other molecule does that. Water, when it freezes, expands. So the converse is that when it melts, it contracts. So how can you have rising sea levels if the ice caps are melting? Sea levels will go down.
That's an interesting illustration, because I'm sure I'm not the only person who's had a drink with ice in it and watched the ice melt. And it's never occurred to me that it would suddenly overflow the glass. And we do, I'm sure many of us have the experience of having frozen something in a container and perhaps not left enough room at the top. And then when it expands, the lid comes off container. So I think, yes, we can see that. But then I guess the question I have as regards that is that if you are right, and the melting of the ice caps isn't going to cause a rise in sea levels, how do we explain the, well, just a few days ago, I was interviewing an archaeologist, and he was talking about um, a place called Doggerland, which is in the northeast. I think
Yeah,
it's north of Scotland.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
It's one of the fishing areas that go Dogger, Tyne,
that's
Fortis,
right. Yeah,
Cromarty.
it's
Oh
up
yeah,
there.
exactly.
Fair,
Yeah,
fair,
yeah,
fair,
yeah,
all that. But there's been a discovery of land that sank at some point, or was flooded at some point, where there was a thriving civilization. So we have this treasure there of an ancient civilization. And I guess people think that that flooding that occurred in ancient history was to do with the melting of the ice due to the ice age coming to an end. So put us straight on that, Michael. What happened?
okay, right. Well, my assumption would be this. Um, we have seen, well, not witnessed, but we know that islands have appeared on the planet that just have come out of the ocean. So the Earth's crust and the mantle and the plates are moving all the time. And it doesn't go beyond comprehension that this can happen in the opposite way of something going up. It can go down also. So I wouldn't put it down to the ice caps melting, because I can't see that that is a plausible reason when the Earth's mantle and plates are moving all the time, and there is the friction, the creation of earthquakes, the volcanoes that come up, and all that sort of stuff. That would
Well,
be my answer. I find it interesting that there was a civilization there, but you know. That doesn't mean to say that it perished because of melting ice caps, because that is not possible.
well, that's very interesting, because that makes me think of North America and the landscape of North America that was created as the ice caps receded and some lakes were left, but certainly the land, as far as I know, did not disappear. But interesting um, features were left upon the land, imprints were left upon the land, if I can put it like that.
Yeah.
Was created, etc., as because of the weight of the ice. So I am beginning to wonder then, because flooding, there are lots of ways in which, well, there are lots of ways in which you can have storms. If we have a stormy time, it creates flooding, etc. So who knows? We're talking about ancient history, and we're also talking about the fact that our planet's climate changes, and that is a natural feature of our planet. It's been changing long before we've had
Oh yeah.
technology to create the carbon dioxide that we're creating at the moment. So I guess then the logical question is, what does influence our weather? So, and is there a difference between climate and weather?
Um, they're interlinked. The whole question of climate is based on thermal energy. Okay, thermal energy comes from only one place. Well, a little bit comes from the Earth's core, geothermal energy. But all our thermal energy comes from that big red object in the sky. That is what gives us thermal energy. Now, depending on where it happens to be at the time, it will create an area, because there's a link between pressure, volume, and temperature. It's a law of physics, okay? If there is increased heat in a certain area, there is high pressure in that area, which is why when you look at the weather map, they show you that, oh, high pressure over the UK, the weather's going to be great, okay? But conversely, because nature's role is to try and achieve an equilibrium in everything. Thank God it never does, otherwise we'd lose thermal energy and transfer of energy and everything else, because it's not designed to be able to reach that equilibrium. But if there is high pressure over here, naturally there will be an equal and opposite low pressure in various places to balance. Now, that is how wind flow occurs, because warmer air, high pressure, warm air flows up and then comes down, colder air. So you create flow of air, you create flow of energy, and you therefore create the climate. Now, if the sun is actually closer, in relative terms, closer to the center of the earth because of the way the earth is positioned with regard to the sun, okay, then you're going to have higher temperatures around the equator, the middle bit, and colder temperatures at the two axes, the North and the South Pole. That's assuming that if we accept that the earth is round. I won't go there. I won't go there.
So let's just get that straight. So the position that we have in the solar system is, of course, about our relationship with the sun. And therefore, as our nearest star, it has an influence on our climate, on what's happening here.
Yeah.
Now, a very long time ago, let's say once upon a time, when certain media organizations were still in the business of telling the truth and presenting good science programs, I remember watching a fascinating documentary which was linking the sunspot activity with the different climate periods
Sure.
on the
sun goes through what is essentially virtually an 11-year cycle. We don't quite understand why it goes through an 11-year cycle, I don't think. Well, at least I don't anyway, but I'm sure somebody will have an answer, maybe. But in this period, when the sun is at its highest activity, then we have greater amounts of radiation, thermal energy that the sun coughs out, okay? And thereby we will have spells of higher temperature. But if the sun goes into a quiet period, and it is predicted by certain eminently trustworthy scientists that we are entering a 400, 500-year period of lower activity by the sun. In other words, a mini ice age. I mean, we won't see it, but they predict, and they've done all the computer modeling based on proper maths, not on a computer, okay? And they followed what happened before. It's called a mini maunder. But essentially, the temperatures over time have not varied more than 1.5 degrees in whatever period. So I don't think we're all going to be burnt to a crisp, even if you were still here 500 years from now, because it couldn't happen.
So how long has this understanding of sunspot activity and the link to climate been around? So how long have people been studying this for?
I would think that, I can't remember when he was around, but certainly quite early, a guy called, as we used to call when we were at school, Copernicus, came up with the idea that, because before that, people believed that we were static, and all the planets and things moved around us. And where he postulated that, no, we revolve around the sun. Well, maybe we do, maybe we don't. That's a discussion for another day, because it isn't a circular orbit. If it's going to be that, it's elliptical. And that therefore creates the changes in the amount of radiation that we get and where it hits. I mean, at the moment, we've got, whereas it's not actually said because it's not convenient to be told this, that the Arctic ice pack is growing.
That's interesting.
Isn't it? But you won't get anybody telling you that.
Okay, I just want to backtrack a little bit. So because now we've got two factors here in playing with each other, in a sense. There's the sun's own cycle and of activity, which of course affects us because we're in the solar system. But then there's also the fact that as we orbit the sun, that too can mean that we're a little bit closer to the sun or a little bit further.
And I think that's part and parcel of the same thing, okay, which affects obviously the amount of thermal energy that any part of the world would receive at any given time. I mean, climate changes every day. Have you not noticed? It's cold in the morning and warmer in the afternoon, okay? And we're now going through another climate change because it's winter and quite cold, very cold. And in the summer, it gets warmer. So, you know, if somebody says, do we have climate change? Oh, yes, we've had it for a long time. Now, there are other influences in addition to the sun. We have a moon.
I was going to ask about the moon.
Now, the moon also has a cycle. And the moon, as we know, has a magnetic influence on the Earth, which is why we end up with tidal flows. Okay? You know, high tide, low tide. This is all down to the moon's magnetic influence on the planet. So we can ask the question, does the moon therefore influence climate and temperature? Well, of course it does, in its own way, because it moves water around, warm water, cold water. So there are influences also in the moon. And I think the moon cycle is about 18 years. I can't remember exactly.
18 and a half.
Yeah, something like that. And thereby, you know, you have those cycles, and then you have the oceanic cycles, you know, the movement of oceans and water. And all these cycles are happening as we speak all the time. You know, it is just happening naturally. Now, who knows what the effect is of, you know, a high sun cycle, a high lunar cycle, and a high other cycle all happening at the same time? I don't know. I'm not sure that anybody does.
Well, that's very interesting thinking of it like that, because the inception of what we know as astrology began largely with people observing the moon to predict the weather, because they wanted to understand when it was the best time to grow crops, when there was a risk of flooding. So they were very, very attuned to the moon as regards the moon's effect on the weather.
Yes. In fact, my mother was Italian, God bless her, but she used to say, oh, look, the moon is standing up. It's not in bed, so the weather's going to be good. You know, where you get the crescent like this, yeah? Oh, the moon's standing up, the weather's going to be wonderful. And you know what? The more I've observed that over time, the more I've gone, you know, she was right. I used to think she was a bit, but no, she was right. And when the moon is lying in bed, the weather's going to be bad. So you might have a point. And it would be interesting for people to actually go out and have a look at the moon to see whether what my mum was saying was right. Go and have a look. Is the moon standing up or is it in bed?
So yes, because the very reason why I was going to ask you about the moon and the relationship with the weather is because of all the lore that exists around the moon as regards weather. So I think that's it's interesting to think of it in those terms, because what you're talking about is the magnetic effect that the moon has on our tides. And actually, again, it makes sense, because if we know that the sea has an influence on our weather, that relationship that exists between the moon and the sun, because of course, you know, at a moon we're being pulled. So it's,
and you have to also remember that you know, the Earth, because of the magnetic poles, also has magnetic lines. Okay, and when you start to, you know, consider the effect of an external created magnetism on the fault lines that already exist on the planet, I can't predict what the answer is, but there certainly has to be an effect, because we're surrounded by magnetism.
Okay, well, this has been a very enlightening conversation. And I think for those who are watching our program, but who are also watching the world around them being turned upside down on facts which actually don't much stand up to scrutiny.
No, they don't.
You have really brought in a very, well, I guess, big beam of light to help us make sense of what is actually natural. And I would add this: it is now our experience that, let's say, in the last 3 years or so, things that have here up until now been considered to be natural have been portrayed as something other than natural and exaggerated in order to bring about larger cooperation by us, the public. So this is why our conversation today is so wonderful, because it's brought back the natural to something of nature, our climate. Thank you very much, Michael.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for the time.
Now, do you have a website? Do you have anything that, okay, that's fine. So this is extra special.
I never created one, because I never considered my knowledge necessarily in these situations to be something that I should sell. I was given the chance to, you know, blessed with, you know, whatever I was given, and I've used it, and I just felt, no, I've got my income from various places. I don't need to create a website to say fund me or donate to me, because I just want to get the information out there.
Well, I am very grateful, and I hope that you have allayed the fears that anyone watching might have. However, I would also like to remind our audience, as you spoke of money, that we do welcome donations for the community assemblies of the British Isles. And
I endorse that. I endorse that, and I think you know, that is necessary, because it is a function requirement that you can't do these things without money. Okay, but if people can't give money, perhaps they can give other things.
Absolutely. And if you have an assembly close to you, we are all, well, people are always looking for volunteers. And if you would like to donate, that's great. There will be a link in the description box to enable you to do that. Michael, thank you once again.
My pleasure. Have a good evening.
And thank you all for watching. Now, next time, I'm going to be finding out about the Community Light Brigade. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.